inside my head. I try to turn it down, but I can't quite drown it out. I'm tortured every
Welcome, and
day.
thank you for joining us today. You're listening to Society Bites Radio, and I'm your host, Dr. Richard Himmer.
And I'm Sherry Himmer, and this is Authentically You, social interaction for the mind and soul.
So, sorry, I was trying to get you to continue there. I was having a problem there. So for the next 25 minutes, we talk about healing and growth from the inside out. Remember, you are 100% responsible for your happiness, joy, and well-being. So in the future, if I do this, pick it up.
Okay, I thought that meant heart attack.
No, I wasn't having a heart attack.
I'm glad you're not having a heart attack. Yeah. So, which brings us to times of uncertainty that we're all living in quarantine as we go through this coronavirus and what that means for us. And sometimes when we don't know what's coming, people can make what's called a prediction error. We don't know what the future means. We don't know when quarantine is going to really end. We don't know if seniors are going to get to walk across the stage and get a diploma this spring. There's a lot of, things that could be removed from our lives. They may return. We just don't know. And in that anticipation of not knowing, our brains do some wacky things.
So a prediction error, by definition, is an inaccurate mental model of your world based on unprocessed experiences. So put that into perspective. We are feeling anxiety because we're trying to predict the future based upon the past. Mm-hmm. Now, there are sometimes that works, but as a general rule, when we're biasing emotions, every single experience, if you and I were to have an experience together, your bias of that experience is different than my bias. It doesn't mean I'm right or you're right. It means it's different. But when we use a bias to try to predict the future, we oftentimes bring in selective memory. And that selective memory will skew it. So a prediction error is not a problem when you're open to further input and then make adjustments off of that.
Sure.
It's how we learn. Our brain uses predictions to initiate body movement. In other words, it's not reactive. We are not reactive people. We're predictive people. So we predict what we should do based upon the data coming at us and then based upon skewed data that we store inside that creates our anxiety and our stress. So we want to be able to learn how to do that. And this is all derived from what we call an immaculate perception of life.
Okay. And can I just use the coronavirus as an example of this? We all know we get these numbers on the news reports of confirmed cases and deaths in various countries and what that means. But we all know that not every human being is being tested for the virus. So it cannot be pure data. For example, at this point, China has stopped testing. And so their numbers have stopped. And the United States has surpassed China's number because we are testing more. So it's
Right.
not an apples to apples comparison. And if you have any sense of, bring a little bit of your math skills in and understanding what's happening with numbers, you know that is not a true picture. It can be inflamed to look like, whoa, look what's happening in the United States. But if you understand what's really happening with those numbers, you go, wait, this data is not pure.
And look at the
and
messenger.
Our brains do the same thing with the little bits of information we have in even a relationship.
Right. Now, let me bring this back because we have, in some of our planning here, we talked a little bit about how to watch the news and not get triggered or flooded.
Which would be helpful right now.
What's happening right now is giving what Sherry just said. If you consider the messenger of the numbers, they're totally unqualified to delivering numbers, and that's the media. And the media has a bias. So if you look at that, anytime someone gives you a message and they're inserting their bias into the message, you know that you cannot take that message at face value. You've got to do some digging and some researching.
You've got to do some critical thinking about every piece of information.
And that's where we are right now. When we're receiving messages and it's a very biased message, I mean, it's like talking to a girl who just broke up with her boyfriend, and then she tells you all the things he did wrong. Well, she still wants to be with him, but she's angry at him. How accurate, how neutral is her message? Have you ever spoken to, let's just say, a woman who was dissed by her husband 10 years ago? He cheated on her. She's not remarried, and she's still angry at him.
Oh, and still hurt and in pain and
Right.
body pain. Yes, it goes on and on.
That's what we're experiencing
Yes.
right now. The messages that we're getting out of Washington, D.C. and through the media is going to be biased. There's a book out right now. Let me see if I can grab it real quick.
The contempt book.
The contempt book. What do I do with it? So there's, oh, there it is. So I just picked it up about 2-3 weeks ago, and I've started reading it already. And I highly recommend this to anyone who wants to understand what we're talking about here. The book is by Arthur C. Brooks. He's the head of a think tank. It's called Love Your Enemies, How Decent People Can Save America from the Culture of Contempt. We're going to talk a little bit about cognitive distortions in the next segment. When you realize how to recognize contempt, and he cites Dr. Gottman a lot, who's the foremost world's expert on marital relationships. Dr. Gottman can listen to a couple for 1 hour. He asks them questions, and he'll listen to them talk for 1 hour.
And he videotaped them.
He hooks them all up to a computer. He got so good at this that he can he can just listen to them talk for 1 hour and have, I believe it's 93% or 94% accuracy in predicting if they'll be married in 3 years. Because he's looking for the 4 horsemen, of which one is contempt. When you understand what contempt is and what it does, contempt is a bias. It's a prediction error. It's a confirmation bias. It's full of immaculate perception. How can you possibly think you can build trust and respect in any kind of relationship if everything you do is biased? If it's always your way, if you have to be right,
yeah,
that's contention.
If I were to unwrap, if contempt was a candy bar and I was to unwrap it, inside it would be, I'm always right. They're usually wrong.
And I'm a victim. I've been treated wrongly.
And I have to go punish. And that leads us right back into the victim trap. But
Right.
It's contempt in this package that doesn't go away because it's based on absolutes.
Okay, this is not where we wanted to
No.
go, but now I've got
But it is connected to cognitive distortions.
It is.
It's the worst cognitive distortion.
Let me give you another example. The entire impeachment process was one of contempt. I don't have a problem with the rule of law. I have a problem with contempt. The bailout package, the new bailout, $2.2 trillion. But when it was
for the
redone
quarantine
for the
relief,
quarantine,
or the corona relief.
that's contempt. The way it was done was contemptuous. It wasn't done with what is right. It was done with who is right. When you start doing things with ulterior motives, you remove the ability to have trust. I don't really give a damn which side of the aisle you're on. What I care about is, are you doing what is right, principle-based, instead of who is right, personal-based? That is very contemptuous, and it's very misguided. That's where the lack of trust and respect come in. See, yeah, I got that off my chest.
Oh, you just turned a really rosy color.
Yeah, I was pretty pissed off. I just get tired of it. Just maybe y'all don't know this, but when Sherry and I we were engaged, and 8 weeks before we got married, I was shipped off to Washington D.C. and I worked on Capitol Hill, and so I served there as an intern. My boss was in the Nixon cabinet but wouldn't talk. I tried for 8 weeks to get her to talk, right? But while I was on Capitol Hill, I realized that I don't want to be a politician because I struggled with contempt. I didn't have a word for it back then, and I also struggled with dishonesty.
And I guess the reason why people use it and why it is profound through politics, and it's used as a vehicle for leverage. And I don't think it's effective, but it's the mainstay of fueling power. But we'll get off that.
And Dr. Brooks, and I'm going to echo this, or I'm going to support this. If you want to find happiness, true happiness in your life, if you want to realize what joy is in your life, if you want to live a life full of pleasures that you cannot verbally describe, get rid of contempt. Start going to neutral. Start practicing these communication techniques that we're talking about, and you will find people will flock to you. Which brings up, I guess we can now go to the planning. I've got a client right now who's struggling with a couple of areas, and we'll call her Gertie. And this entire process where we're going stemmed from a question that was asked by another client of mine. We'll call him Ralph. Mm-hmm. Ralph's question was straightforward. He said, how do I, or why do I retain negative memories and emotions about my first marriage in my second marriage? And she has nothing to do with my first marriage. They keep coming back to me. So now let me jump over to Gertie real quick. Here's her comment to me. As we hung up on the phone the other day, she said, and I told her, I said, I really enjoy talking to you, Gertie. I enjoy the conflict. I enjoy working through these processes, and I could see her smiling and whatnot. And then she says, yeah, but you won't want to be my friend after 3 years. I stopped immediately. I went, stop. That was a cognitive distortion. What are you telling yourself? That's not true. And she says, well, it is true. And I said, well, I didn't ask you what you told. You're telling me about me. You're using yesterday's experiences where people haven't remained your friends. And she had a period certain that she gave me. She said, nobody stays my friend after this long.
Interesting.
So that's that's her persona, right?
Mm-hmm.
And remember, persona simply means a stage mask. But she's got a cognitive distortion that helps us understand what her false narrative is. And so as we unzip that, I had her tell me what her false narrative was, and then what if it? Now we're going to get to how we're going to address these. Everybody that I know will have memories that will come up that they don't really want to have anymore, that they struggle with. So let's talk about how we're going to work through the cognitive distortions. What do cognitive distortions mean? What do they lead to? So in the time we have left, I'd like to unzip that just a little bit. Sherry, if you'd be good enough to read the quote by Epictetus from the first and second century.
What really frightens and dismays us is not external events themselves, but the way in which we think about them. It's not things that disturb us, but our interpretation of their significance. And we could even apply that to coronavirus too, right?
Oh, that would not be difficult. But going back to the fact that I'm getting calls every day about people who are now under a lot of stress.
Their stress levels have gone up.
Their stress levels have gone up.
They've changed.
I had a girl call me the other day, young girl, high school age, just having a dickens of a time. And so when I asked her just a couple of questions, I found out that the primary source of her challenge were her parents. And her parents were in denial, meaning they're not willing to be found. They don't think they do anything wrong. They think that the problem is with their daughter, and the daughter's everything is wrong. Well, the daughter is a teenager. She's a senior in high school. And when parents think that they're right, notice the common theme here, and they don't know how to connect and redirect, which they don't. She doesn't have any kind of connection with mom and dad. Then there's a lot of challenges that she's going to face the rest of her life. So we just did a 20-minute guided mindfulness. It was a wonderful experience. It was just beautiful, really. And she was able to find a nice balance in her space. The point being is that she's already telling herself a story about life because mom and dad didn't connect with her. So she's already got a false narrative based upon past experiences. So she'll then engage in what are called cognitive distortions. And so by definition, a cognitive, or let's go back to this a second. Cognitive dissonance is when one uses selective memory, which creates a bias in the situation, or what I call immaculate perception, to make decisions, negotiate, or engage in conflict. And then that'll turn into contention. So now we're back to this whole thing again. Our inability today to be neutral, to first understand what's going on before we make a decision and have everyone try to agree with us, is one of the reasons we have these things keep coming back to us, because we never process them in the first place. They're laying dormant in our subconscious. And when something happens that reminds our subconscious, oh, here's a connection to an experience you had before, and it could be a sound, it could be a smell, it could be a word, it could be someone's behavior that reminds your subconscious of this over here. All of this is done below the cognitive level. So I'll share something with you real quick. One of my clients recently said, when we were going over false narratives like I have no worth, and the list is right here, I don't deserve, I can never be safe, I'm not lovable. She says, but I don't believe that. This is what I believe about me. I think I am lovable. I think I do have worth. And I said, okay, there's a disconnect here. You might have some experiences at the cognitive level where you've got empirical evidence to support all of those to be true, but your behavior doesn't support any of it.
That her behavior doesn't show that she truly believes what she says about her worth.
That is correct. When you understand a cognitive distortion or a manifesting behavior is indicative, it's a window into the soul, then you start looking at things differently. So one of the homework assignments I'm